Resource nationalism is back in the spotlight as countries ramp up efforts to control their critical minerals. From Africa to South America, governments are tightening rules on mining to secure their slice of the growing demand for materials essential to clean energy and technology. But what does this mean for miners and the global supply chain? Well, joining us is Jimena Blanco, Chief Analyst at Verisk Maplecroft, to unpack their latest Resource Nationalism Index and explore how these shifting policies are reshaping the mining landscape. Jimena, thanks very much indeed for talking to us.
Thank you for having me.
Let's start with a current example. I mean, if we look at a country like Chile, for example, recently announcing plans to nationalize parts of its lithium industry, a move that shocked many in the sector. How does this decision reflect the broader trend of resource nationalism highlighted in your index?
Well, what we're seeing increasingly is countries turning to more nuanced forms of resource nationalism. So if we continue with the example of Chile, for example, there were no nationalizations or expropriations announced. It was announced as a policy change going forward, in which there would be new requirements for new entrants into the market and potentially a renegotiation of contracts for the companies that are already operating in Chile. But it's very much built around this need to secure supply chains because of the role that critical minerals play in the green transition, in the tech revolution, and also in defense systems. So we're moving away, in a sense, from what I would call, the blunt policies of the past, where we used to see these nationalizations at times of, price booms. And we're moving into much more nuanced policies where governments in emerging markets, but also in Western democracies, are deploying a number of different policies to secure supply chains and also try to keep recycling at home.
Mm-hmm. And I guess you answered it there. I was about to ask you, are we seeing similar moves from other major mineral producing nations? But then the question comes up, what sectors or minerals are most at risk according to what you're finding?
Well, we're seeing that the policies, vary depending on the mineral and the metals you're talking about. But by and large, we're talking about the critical resources that we need, whether it's copper, lithium, rare earths. And we're seeing that, Western democracies, for example, are moving in a way where they're trying to encourage mining companies to invest and develop projects at allied or more friendly nations to what their own political position is, and to discourage investments or partnerships or the establishment of supply chains in nations that they see as rivals. So we're truly seeing how geopolitics is feeding into resource nationalism and shaping how governments, both developed and emerging markets, are using different tools to try to position themselves in a more secure place going forward.
You look at Western democracies, I mean, particularly the US and Canada. Are we seeing more policies armed or aimed rather at securing domestic supply chains? How does this form of resource nationalism differ from like approaches that we look at that China, for example, uses?
We're seeing, similar policies in the US and Canada in terms of the use of subsidies or the use of specific industrial policies to try to promote the development of specific sectors or specific segments within the critical mineral space. And what we are seeing, though, in terms of the difference to what we see, for example, in China, is that it's still relatively open to the market in the sense that they maintain competition, but they try to stimulate the development of these sectors at home or with inputs from countries that have free trade agreements with their own countries or that are geopolitically more aligned to the US and Canada.
Now, I mean, from an investor perspective, you get investors, you get CEOs looking at this. I mean, these policies can complicate operations for these mining companies, can't they? Especially those working across borders. What strategies do you see miners using to mitigate risks from this sort of increased state protectionism?
Well, the number one policy or strategy, rather, by mining companies is to try to diversify the places where they're exploring, where they're developing projects, or where they're considering new partnerships. They're also trying to establish much closer relations both with home governments in terms of the home governments of the companies, but also with the governments of the countries where they're operating to try to understand how the geopolitical landscape may shape future policies. And I think the third one, which is crucial, also has to do with community work. How are they working with communities, not only from a social approval perspective, but also to get communities to support this transition into new energies and to benefit from those, so that in some shape or some way, these communities can also influence or lobby their own governments to maintain their operations where they are, or to support the continued development of the mining industry in those areas. But it is a huge challenge because we're talking here about many policies potentially coming together and coalescing over different areas. So it's by no means an easy task for a mining board today to decide where to invest.
It's interesting you say that, because with the president-elect Donald Trump surfacing, you can see what's happening, tension-wise across the border between the US and Canada. You have this threats of the 25% tariff, for example, and that posturing is likely to sort of surface more and more, isn't it?
Yes, I mean, in many ways, these policies can also be tools for negotiation. So, of course, there's always the possibility that there'll be negotiation, that some of these tariffs that President-elect Trump is talking about may not be deployed or implemented in the way that we're thinking of today. But that, I think, is part of this very complex network of competing needs that countries are seeing. And so it's not, for example, surprising that in early December, China decided to ban the export of rare earths to the United States. It's part of this competition of who has leverage in one area versus the other party, and tries to use that to pressure policy change or to pressure the change of policy proposals before they're deployed.
Yeah, it's very interesting indeed. Certainly worthwhile keeping an eye on that one. Well, Jimena Blanco from Verisk Maplecroft, thanks very much indeed for your time.
Thank you.